Welcome to another episode of R&R Living Life. In this episode, Rick and I continue exploring the Shire of Gingin, with the town of Gingin one of the oldest towns and one of the earliest settled areas in Western Australia, with explorers and pioneers arriving in 1831, only 2 years after the Swan River colony was proclaimed, and the sparsely populated agricultural shire of Dandagra. We begin this episode as we made our way along a gravel road out to the Ocean Drive, where we drove through rolling coastal plains to Ledge Point, a small coastal township established to service the local fishing and crayfishing industries, with 4 known shipwrecks resting off the coast. The town's name originates from the nearby coastal feature of a series of rocky ledges on the point of the same name, first described in an 1875 hydrographic survey. On the outskirts of town is a designated four-wheel drive track. From Ledge Point we made our way to Lancelin, with the protected waters of the bay sheltered by outer reefs and Lancelin and Edward Islands, creating ideal conditions for all manner of activities, and sheltered the cray boats at their moorings. To the east of the town is a sea of gigantic snow-white sand dunes, some standing over 30 metres in height and around 2 kilometres long, that stretches to the horizon, the biggest sand dunes in Western Australia. From the beach we could see Lancelin Island, which is about 500 metres from the mainland, home to seals and plenty of birds. In the 1940s, the area became the base for the rock lobster industry and attracted its first summer tourists, that of inland farmers who wanted to fish, camp, and visit the beach. Lancelin was gazetted a town in 1950, originally called Wangari. In recent times, Lancelin has seen a building boom, with lots of new homes on the edge of the Indian Ocean, replacing the old fibro holiday shacks. We enjoyed a stroll along the shore, near the jetty, where we watched the lobster boats unloading. From the lookout, we had impressive views of Lancelin Island, the Indian Ocean, and glimpses of the sand dunes behind Lancelin. Though Rick and I had no trouble making our way to the lookout, I have read that the wooden stairs and platform have recently been upgraded since our visit. We could just make out the lobster boats as they returned to the jetty. From Lancelin, we drove to Nilga Nature Reserve Lookout, about 15 minutes up the highway, with spectacular views of the Indian Ocean, with sweeping coastal views from Ledge Point in the south to Wedge Island Nature Reserve in the north. Gilgan Nature Reserve covers an area of approximately 5,600 hectares and includes white sandy beaches, extensive sand dunes backing onto heathlands, providing habitats for a number of birds, reptiles and mammals. It is also a conservation area for plants including Banksia woodlands, coastal heath and low heath, as well as being an important wildlife corridor linking with northern reserves and national parks. Nilgan Nature Reserve was named after a swamp that had been named after a historic well. Wells and watering holes were important to travellers and drovers who journeyed near here along the northwest stock route that ran from Star Swamp in Perth to Walkaway, south of Geraldton, passing through parts of Nambung National Park and the Southern Beekeepers Nature Reserve. During World War II, the stock route was a major movement corridor for the Army. After the war, sections of the stock route were still in use by beekeepers, hunters, trappers and holiday makers, until a network of better roads to farms and coastal towns gradually superseded it. We strolled along the 600-metre return wildflower walk where we saw some of the many wildflowers in bloom, though I would suggest wearing a fly veil due to the multitude of flies. We continued north along the highway, passing along the edge of the Namberg National Park, about 20 kilometres south of Cervantes, on the Swan Coastal Plain. The 19,268 hectare national park has beautiful beaches, coastal dune systems and trees and flowering plants typical of the northern coastal plain, as well as containing one of the most fascinating landscapes, the Pinnacles Desert. 3 old systems of sand dunes run parallel to the West Australian coast from Cervantes to Busselton, These dunes formed from wind-blown beach sand rich in lime and mark ancient shorelines on the Swan coastal plain. The further the dune systems are from the sea, the older and more gently undulating they are. The shape and character of the sands determine the plants that grow on them. The Quindalup system of white lime-rich sands is found immediately inland from the foredunes and is constantly being added to by sand from the foredunes and the beach. Further inland, the older spearwood dunes have yellow and brownish quartz sands, often overlying limestone. The pinnacles are the eroded remnants of what was once a thick bed of limestone beneath these sands. The silica-rich sands of the Bazandine system are found on the park's east. Thousands of limestone pillars rise up to 4 metres out of the stark landscape of yellow sand. Some are jagged, sharp-edged columns, others resemble tombstones. A set of rare circumstances produced the pinnacles. Firstly, the huge sand dunes stabilised. The rain which fell on the dunes leached down through the sand, carrying the calcium. This resulted in the lower levels of the dune solidifying into a soft limestone. As this stabilisation occurred, a layer of soil formed on top of the dune, which allowed plants to grow and further cemented the limestone below. Gradually, the lower layer of soil, which lay beneath the surface and the limestone, formed into a hard cap, which resulted in the older dunes having 3 levels: a soil and plant level near the surface, a hard cap below the surface, and a thick layer of soft limestone at the bottom of the dune. This collection of amazing limestone formations from approximately 25,000 years ago, when the sea receded and left the deposits of seashells. No one knows for sure how long ago this process occurred. It may have started as long ago as 500,000 years, but equally it may only be a few thousand years old, and it may still be continuing today. The Western Australian Museum believes it occurred sometime in the last 80,000 years. The advent of drier weather in the region resulted in the top layer of plants and soil being removed, and gradually the pinnacles were exposed, so that today they stand like strange sentinels on a plain of wind-blown yellowish sand. The first Europeans to discover them were Major Leeuwig and his stockmen in 1849, who were camped near the Nambung River, and during the night their cattle strayed. While searching for the cattle the next morning, the stockmen came across the Pinnacle Desert. We had visited the Pinnacles Desert some 12 years earlier, but little had changed since that visit. On the outskirts of Cervantes, we stopped at Lake Theseus and strolled along a 300-metre boardwalk over living microbial communities known as blistermats and stromatolites, descendants of the earliest life forms on Earth that produced oxygen for subsequent life forms. The stromatolites here at Lake Theseus have been growing for about 3,500 years. Several types of microbial structures, stromolites built in layers, and thrombolites, clotted structures, are both present at Lake Theseus, one of only 5 sites in Western Australia with stromatolites, being the oldest living fossil in the world at 3.5 billion years old. The blister mat is a living community where bacteria in the top layers of sediment releases oxygen to form sand bubbles on the surface, hence the name blister mat. The different shapes are built by different types of cyanobacteria. As the cyanobacteria grows upwards, their activities bind calcium carbonate onto the growing surface, with the lake conditions 1.5 times saltier than the ocean, with very few predators, thus allowing the microbial communities to survive for thousands of years. The dark areas on the platforms and domes indicate wet active growth of cyanobacteria, which continue constructing the stromolites. Cervantes took its name from the Cervantes Islands, about 1.5 miles southwest of the township. that were named after the ship Cervantes went down off the coast in the 1840s. Fishing has always had an important role in the development of Cervantes, as during the 1950s it became a fishing shack establishment for cray fishermen. Now renowned for its fresh crayfish or western rock lobster, we visited the Lobster Shack, the Indian Ocean rock lobster factory, where we enjoyed a lobster lunch. The Lobster Shack offers behind the scene tours of a live lobster processing factory, a very tourist driven tour. We returned to Gidget through Cataby, a small settlement on the side of the Brand Highway, while further along we passed Iluka Resources that officially opened its mineral sands mine in 2019, with mineral sands products used in a range of industrial and household applications, including pigment, ceramics, titanium metal, water and air purification systems, and fibre optics. The following day we moved on to Eneabba, where we camped at the recreation grounds. We took the Koala Road to the Brand Highway, stopping at Regan's Ford, a small town with the surrounding areas producing wheat and other cereal crops, and is a receival site for cooperative bulk handling. The town is named after a ford over the Moore River and the site of an old stone crossing constructed in 1876 for Walter Padbury, an early settler who had taken up land further north in the early 1850s. The name of the ford having been named after a shepherd, Edward Regan, who acquired land near the ford in the 1860s and with the help of a group of local Aboriginals constructed the ford. In 1880, the land adjacent to the ford was reserved as a watering place for travellers and stock. Today we passed olive plantations in the area. The countryside was very different, with lots of native reserves and gradual hills and valleys, with cropping interspersed amongst the reserves. We passed Emu Downs Solar Farm, adjacent to Emu Downs Wind Farm, and at the time of completion in 2018 was the largest solar farm in Western Australia. The solar farm has 75,000 photovoltaic solar panels on a 70-hectare site east of the wind farm. Eneabba is surrounded by national heritage reserves, said to have some of West Australia's prettiest coastal and wildflower landscapes, but is basically a mining service town. The first European to visit the area was in 1839 by the second disastrous George Grey expedition along the west coast, after he and his party were forced to walk through the area after their boats were lost. In 1870, the first settler, William Horsley Rowland, arrived from Greenwich. He took up a 1,200 hectare lease at Eneabba Springs and survived by shepherding, trapping horses and pigs, and living on wild game. The area around Eneabba, also known as the Eneabba Sandplain, was opened up for agricultural purposes in the 1950s for a large group of model farms, comprising the Eneabba War Service Land Settlement Project, with the town being gazetted in January 1961. In April of 1976, the Dongara-Eneabba railway line opened, linking the Iluka Resources mineral sands mine at Eneabba to the Midland railway line at Dongara. That afternoon, the sunset was stunning. The following day was an exploring day where we drove south to the Brand Highway towards the halfway roadhouse, through farming areas with grass trees, exclusion areas, and banksia trees. On the hillside were lots of short bushy vegetation, short grass trees with stalks standing out, cycads and tall trees where the water lay, and on to Le Sueur National Park, covering an area of 26,987 hectares, and is a global biodiversity hotspot, being gazetted on the 24th of January 1992, following public pressure to stop a major coal mine development. We were to see the park in a very different way to what we had expected, as just prior to our visit it had been burnt. The park straddles the boundary between the wheat belt and the Midwest regions and includes two mesas known as Mount Lesueur and Mount Miquard. We followed an unsealed gravel road with scenic views towards Julian Bay and the pretty coastline of Green Head. Lesueur National Park is a botanic oasis with over 900 indigenous plant species, many of which are endemic, and home to 129 species of native bird and 52 reptile species, with a wide range of geological formations, landscapes, and soil types, which vary from salt lakes and remnant coastal dunes in the northwest through to laterite ridges in the east. We took the scenic 18.5 kilometre one-way bitumen road beginning at Cockleshell Gully Road through the park past Mount Lesueur, while closer to the exit of the scenic drive the scenery changed a bit and there were grass trees as far as the eye could see. The recent burning of the area made for some interesting scenery. It was really interesting to see the grass trees and cycads standing proudly across the hillsides. Being only 20 kilometres northeast of Jurien Bay, we could see the coastline in the distance in a few places. The unburnt country was vastly different to the burnt areas. We stopped in at Drummond Car Park with many interpretive signs to explain the biology and traditional uses of some of the 900 plant species in the park. I could only imagine what the park would look like at the height of wildflower season. We stopped and stretched our legs at Cockleshell Gully with its varied landscape of low heath, small sections of Wandoo woodlands and winding creek lines, with a high diversity of plant life typical of the park, where one side of the road was burnt, while the other unburnt, with some vegetation still covered in pink fire retardant. Though burnt, it was still worth the drive. The scenery was spectacular, even in its blackened state. We did see some emus, but none of the other native mammals that live in the area. The changing vegetation of the area was incredible and made exploring this national park extremely interesting. Who would have thought that burnt country could produce such a striking and dramatic landscape? I only hope that the 9 plants found nowhere else in the world and the 111 plants found only in the local region survive what looked like a horrendous event, even though I know the park has an unusually large range of geology and topography and that many plants have evolved different mechanisms to cope with low water availability and regeneration from fire. I can only hope that the fire was an intended burn-off for the health of the park. Rick and I have been enjoying the nature reserves and national parks in the area, so very interesting and vastly different to what we have been used to on the east coast of Australia. The bluish-green waters of the mid-west coast have been dubbed the Turquoise Coast and is a stretch of coast from Lancelin to Dongara that includes Jurien Bay Marine Park and 36 islands, which are grouped into 14 island nature reserves, where we will continue exploring next episode as we visit Jurien Bay, Green Head, and the Three Bays Lookout at Lehman before returning to Eneabba. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Give us a thumbs up if you did. Join us next time as we return to the Turquoise Coast and then on to the agricultural area of Minganoo in the mid-west of Western Australia. Take care and stay safe. Cheers for now. Rick and Rosemary. R&R Living Life.